This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Chinese President Xi Jinping says the world faces a stark choice between peace and war as he oversees a show of military force in Beijing in a parade marking the end of World War II. Present and prominent at the celebration, the leaders of Russia and North Korea adding weight to China's diplomatic showcase. Kim Jong Un vows to go all out to help Moscow as Vladimir Putin thanks Pyongyang for its help in the Ukraine war. American leader Donald Trump throws cold water on the parade, accusing the leaders of China, Russia and North Korea of conspiring against the U.S. And South Korea's defense ministry justifies a proposal for the biggest increase in military spending in 7 years as deterrence against the nuclear-armed North. National indebtedness, the sharp end of investor concerns as a sell-off in long-dated bonds sends yields in Japan to a record high. Also on the bulletin, another layer of complexity in Thailand's political crisis. The acting prime minister moving to dissolve parliament as a possible precursor to finding a new leader. Plus, a closer inspection of the missiles, fighter jets and other Chinese hardware on display during the parade in Beijing. Some shown publicly for the first time. China has staged a massive military parade in Beijing to mark the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. And CNA's senior China editor Olivia Xiong is here with me in the studio right now. So, Olivia, I have to say it was quite an extraordinary show of soft and hard power in full display in Beijing today.
That's right. There's a lot to unpack here, and we will in the show. But, you know, China's military might was on full display. We saw many new weapons being showcased for the very first time. Observers are saying that China here sending a message, wanting to show that it's able to still make progress, modernize its military in spite of, ongoing pressure from the West. That it's also able to convene world leaders at a time like this. President Xi Jinping, in his speech, declared that the great rejuvenation of his nation is, quote, unstoppable, as he also warned that the world faces a choice between peace or war. Now, my colleague Tan Tzu-Hui, she was up bright and early, reporting at 2:45 a.m., and she had a front row seat, though, to the parade and files this report.
A rare and striking image. Chinese President Xi Jinping making his way to Tiananmen, flanked by Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong Un, all facing challenges with the US and the West. They and over 20 other heads of state and government took prime position at the viewing gallery as China kicked off a grand gathering to mark Victory Day and 80 years since Japan's surrender in World War II. All eyes were on President Xi as he addressed more than 50,000 spectators on site and millions more watching at home and abroad. The Chinese leader framing the anniversary as a turning point in the country's history, declaring that the great rejuvenation of his nation was unstoppable.
中华民族是不畏强暴、自立自强的伟大民族。当年 面对正义与邪恶、光明与黑暗、进步与反动的生死较量，中国人民同仇敌忾，奋起反抗。今天，人类又面临和平还是战争、对话还是对抗、 共赢还是零和的抉择。中国人民坚定站在历史正确一边。
President Xi also said that the Chinese people always stand on the right side of history.
中国人民解放军始终是党和人民完全可以信赖的英雄部队，全军将士 要忠实履行神圣职责，加快建设世界一流军队， 坚决维护国家主权、统一、领土完整，为实现中华民族伟大复兴提供战略支撑，为世界和平与发展做出更大贡献。
President Xi, who is also chairman of the Central Military Commission, inspected tens of thousands of troops lined up along Beijing's main boulevard, Chang'an Avenue. The parade involved formations of various military branches, including the People's Liberation Army's Rocket Force, which oversees the use of China's missile arsenal. New branches like the Aerospace Force and Information Support Force were also part of the march past. A highly choreographed spectacle indeed, but also a show of military might on Beijing's iconic Tiananmen Square. Tens of thousands of troops marching towards Chinese President Xi Jinping's call to becoming a world-class military. For the first time, the PLA unveiled its full strategic nuclear triad with land, air, and sea cruise missiles. State media hailing the weapons as China's strategic ace to safeguard the country's sovereignty and the nation's dignity. This amid tensions in the Taiwan Strait and disputes in the South China Sea. Other military hardware included hypersonic precision strike weapons, and giant underwater drones also featured. But beyond the flexing of military might, the show ended on a poignant note. 80,000 doves and 80,000 balloons filled the sky, as China sought to frame its show of strength not only as deterrence, but also as a safeguard for peace and progress. Tan Sihui, CNA, Beijing.
So, Olivia, lots to unpack there in terms of what China is trying to signal to the audiences at home and abroad. And basically, do you think Mr. Xi, he's trying to portray this vision of regional peace, but at the same time, he's putting more muscle behind the military?
Yeah, so the keyword here is deterrence, right? So in President Xi's speech there, we saw that he did link history with the present in talking about how in order for World War II tragedies not to repeat themselves, that countries would have to treat each other fairly. But at the same time here, we are talking about China showcasing its latest military hardware at a time when it feels it has a right to do so, given the ongoing tensions and questions about sovereignty, especially when it comes to some of the disputes that it's having in contested areas like the South China Sea, for example. And that's also one of the themes that we'll be picking up with a guest, Dr. James Cha from the China program at RSIS, a bit later in the show. But one of the other things that our team was keen to find out was so much is talked about at what's happening at Tiananmen, at the parade, but what do the rest of, regular folk in Beijing, how do they feel about the parade? And our colleague Deborah Wong was out earlier, also out and about, and this is what people told her.
I'm standing on a road that's perpendicular to Chang'an, and that's where the buses are. You can see at the moment it's blocked off because that's the main trunk of the road that will be receiving the military parade. And you can see the entire roads are empty because the police started clearing them out earlier this morning at about 8:30, just before the parade started at 9 a.m. And all around me are people who have come down specially to watch the parade.
早上6点到的。因为特意把孩子就是很早就让他起床，然后收拾收拾赶紧过来了。最想看飞机。飞机。对，我也是想看飞机。
那个咱们的那个国家假装队，还有那个飞机什么的。
我最想看的就是那些阅兵的方队。
But they were told to their disappointment that they cannot go beyond the blockade. And so what we're seeing right now are people gathered here, sitting down. They're not going home, even though they've been told to watch the parade online. They're sitting down here together because they're telling me that, the on-site atmosphere is what they came for.
China last held the military parade in 2019 to mark 70 years of the People's Republic. But this year's display is the largest ever. And it's also the culmination of months of events marking 80 years since the end of the Second World War. The parade 6 kilometers down the road at Tiananmen Square. Foreign leaders are gathered, a projection of power to the outside world.
是祖国的强大才能吸引来这么多的这个国外的这个元首领导人来共同见证咱们中国抗日战争胜利80周年，觉得这是一个非常骄傲的一个事情。
就是感觉祖国强大了，感觉自己要亲身体验一下生在这个新社会，啊，我们也要对这个社会发展尽一份努力嘛。
这些年的发展，我也是就是一点点看得起来的，也对中国的军事装备更新或者强大，也是从心里边一直是从内心发自内心的自豪，就这种感觉。而且我们作为中国人，真的是5000年，现在是越来越强大了，非常自豪。
Just past 10:15 a.m., they were rewarded by the fly past zooming by from Tiananmen Square. In a break from protocol, the police even relented, allowing residents to catch that before clearing them off the streets, leaving many beaming with patriotic pride. Deborah Wong, CNA, Beijing.
North Korea's Kim Jong Un has accepted an invite by Vladimir Putin to visit Russia after holding talks in Beijing. Well, earlier, the North Korean leader pledged his full support for Moscow.
아까도 말씀드렸지만 내가 당신과 러시아 인민을 위해서 할 수 있는 것이 있다면 또 해야 되는 것이 있다면 그 형제적인 그런 옹으로 우리가 감당해야 될 옹으로 간주하고 모든 걸 다해서 도울 용의가 있습니다.
Mr. Putin thanked Mr. Kim for sending his special forces to fight in the war against Ukraine, saying it was the North Korean leader's idea. The Russian leader also praised the troops for their courage, saying they were instrumental in recapturing the Kursk region. Seoul's spy agency estimates that some 2,000 North Korean troops were killed. Pyongyang and Moscow have drawn closer since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, signing a mutual defense treaty last year. And CNA's senior correspondent Lim Yoon-suk, she joins us live from Seoul. Yoon-suk, first up, how do we read into this so-called brotherly display between Mr. Kim and Mr. Putin?
Well, you know, there were lots of handshake and smiles between the leaders. And in fact, the two leaders traveled from the state reception to where they were holding the negotiations in the same car. And that, to many, you know, watchers here is being seen as this brotherly display. But some analysts here are saying that, you know, and looking at the statements that they made before that meeting, it is clear that they both want to highlight and show how they share history, mutual support, and are really one when it comes to military and strategic issues. Now, for Kim Jong Un, he is trying to show that he has powerful allies and that he can and is standing alongside world leaders. While for Mr. Putin, it really reinforces Russia's ties with North Korea. But having said that, you know, a lot of analysts here say that they're not really reading much into it and that it's mostly symbolic, at least for now. And, you know, though the two leaders are stressing this close ties and cooperation, there's really not much substance to that meeting that happened earlier today. And so many, you know, analysts are saying that definitely North Korean watchers, both here in Seoul and abroad, have been watching this very closely. And in fact, you know, analysts here have been monitoring everything that's been happening in Beijing. You know, some saying that Kim Jong Un wore this black suit and he had this you know, gold-colored tie on, and they were trying to make sense of what that meant. They were also talking about how, you know, we had a chance to see his 12-year-old daughter, Kim Ju-wei, because she did arrive with him on that train, and not his wife, Lee Sol-ju, who had accompanied him in previous trips. Now, many analysts here were also trying to see why she didn't attend this military parade, and whether, you know, bringing her to China meant that she's been groomed as a future leader, or simply being introduced to the outside world. And so, you know, the meeting between the two leaders today and everything that really happened in Beijing is something that South Korean analysts here and abroad have been really watching closely and trying to figure out what it all means for the North Korean regime.
So, yeah, a lot of questions still remain. But in terms of reaction, how is Seoul reacting to Mr. Kim's visit to China and the significance of it?
Well, it is very significant, and a lot of people here, analysts here, have been saying that, Kim Jong-un's trip to China isn't really just about sending a message to the international community, but also of sending a message to his domestic audience, and that's back home in North Korea. Because that picture of him standing alongside the leaders of China and Russia will be something that he'll remember, or he'll want to remember, and something that he will want the North Koreans to remember for a very long time, because, that picture alone sends a very clear message to the North Koreans that their leader, Kim Jong Un, is a strong leader now, is capable of standing shoulder to shoulder with world leaders. And in fact, the South Korea's intelligence agency believes that Kim Jong Un is trying to use this China trip and the upcoming 80th founding anniversary of the ruling Workers' Party in Pyongyang in October to set the stage for major policy announcements. Now, let me share with you what one member of that intelligence committee said recently told reporters.
정상회담에 그치지 않고 그 이후에 국정 운영의 포석과도 연관된다라고 하는 점에서 9차 당대회에서 새로운 시대의 새로운 전략이라는 이름이나 슬로건 그런 방향으로 새로운 전략 노선을 채택하고 발표할 가능성이 매우 높다. 그 시기는 내년 초로 보고 있는 것 같습니다.
Now, the spy agency here also believes that a large military parade is being planned for this anniversary, as about 10,000 troops have been mobilized for rehearsals. It's not as large as Beijing, but analysts here are saying that it is significant enough to showcase North Korea's military might at home and abroad. And also another interesting point is that South Korea, at least for South Koreans, is that South Korea's National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik had a chance to shake hands with Kim Jong Un before the parade. We don't know if they were able to exchange any words, but according to the National Assembly, they did exchange handshakes. And what's very interesting here is that apparently Speaker Woo had an opportunity to convey a message to Kim Jong Un through President Putin. And this was because at the reception, Mr. Putin asked him about inter-Korean ties and whether he wanted to send a message to North Korea's leader, and he did so through Mr. Putin. I think that's very important that Mr. Putin wanted to sort of like play this, go between the two Koreas. So we'll see if anything comes out of that.
Interesting development there. Thanks so very much for that report. CNA's senior correspondent Lim Yeon-suk in Seoul. Now, the showcase of military might drew eyeballs from all around the world, including Washington. U.S. President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social midway through the parade, accusing China, Russia, and North Korea of plotting against the U.S. Now, he began by highlighting the role the U.S. played in helping China during World War II, saying many Americans died in the process and that he hopes they are honored and remembered for their sacrifice. Mr. Trump also extended well wishes to President Xi and the Chinese people on their day of celebration, but ended his post by asking Mr. Xi to give his warmest regards to Mr. Putin and Mr. Kim as they, quote, conspire against the U.S. Now, ahead of the parade, President Trump had said that he is not worried about China forming an axis against the U.S. The American leader said that he does not see the warming of ties between China, Russia, and North Korea as a challenge when asked if he was concerned about an alliance acting as a counterweight to the U.S.
China needs us, and I have a very good relationship with President Xi, as you know, but China needs us much more than we need them. No, I don't see that at all, no. And I had actually a very good meeting with President Putin a couple of weeks ago. We'll see if anything comes out of it. If it doesn't, we'll take a different stand.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, HKEX shares end the day in the red amid allegations of insider trading by staff. And Toyota hits the accelerator in producing cars in Europe. We'll have the details next. Hello again. It is now time for your business news with Roland Lim. And Roland, which market are we starting with today?
We are starting with Hong Kong, specifically the bourse operator itself. Hong Kong exchanges and clearing shares ending the day in the red. That's while authorities probe allegations of insider trading involving at least 2 individuals at the exchange. Now, they're investigating if regulatory staff tipped off traders about sensitive information or announcements from dozens of listed companies over several years. Turning to the broader Chinese markets, a solid run on mainland equities showed signs of fatigue after the Shanghai Composite hit a decade high. Shanghai Composite ending the day more than 1% in the red. Shenzhen component down 0.65%, Hang Seng 0.6% lower. Fresh data that reinforced optimism around a recovery in domestic demand wasn't enough to offset the losses. A private sector survey showed that China's services activity in August grew at its fastest pace in 15 months. A company said their businesses were supported by strong domestic demand and a rebound in foreign orders. The U.S. is escalating its clampdown on tech flows to China with a tightening of curbs on chips. Now, TSMC is the latest target of restrictions on foreign operations in China. Washington has revoked waivers that allow the Taiwanese chipmaker to send essential gear to its plant in Nanjing. Samsung and SK Hynix earlier had similar waivers cancelled. TSMC's China footprint is relatively small as compared to its South Korean rivals. The new curbs would likely cause longer wait times for permits, leading to delays in the supply chain. And that means that by the end of December, suppliers need export licenses to ship American chip-making equipment and spare parts to TSMC's mainland site. Still, TSMC says it's working with Washington and is committed to keeping the plant running. Taiwan's Ministry of Economic Affairs said it does not expect the U.S. decision to affect overall competitiveness of its domestic semiconductor industry. Shares of TSMC lost as much as 1.3% during the trading session, though they regained ground to close flat. SK Hynix and Samsung did gain, though. Another sign of deepening ties between Beijing and Moscow, the signing of a deal to build a new cross-border gas pipeline that could reshape global energy flows. Russian energy giant Gazprom told state media the pipeline will run from West Siberia to northern China, but the two sides have yet to agree on pricing. Once ready, the pipeline is capable of supplying some 50 billion cubic meters of gas annually. It'll divert gas fields that used to serve Europe and offer China an alternative to importing LNG from the US, Qatar, and Australia. Western countries have been cutting dependence on Russian energy supplies, making China and India the biggest buyers of Russian oil and gas. The US has threatened tariffs on China and India over their purchases of Russian oil. Japanese long bonds fell today with the 30-year yield hitting an all-time high. Long-dated government bonds are facing global challenges given a number of developments worrying investors in high-debt economies. The 30-year JGB yield jumped as much as nearly 10 basis points to a record high of 3.301%, and the 20-year JGB yield rose 7 basis points to 2.69%, and that is its highest level since October of 1999. In Japan, Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's close aide, LDP Secretary General Hiroshi Moriyama, announced his intention to resign from his post after July's upper house election. Investors are thought to be interpreting this as news that could affect the Prime Minister's future as well. The market moves flows a global sell-off of long-duration bonds overnight in the US and Europe as well. US 30-year Treasury yields rose to closely watched 5% level for the first time since mid-July. And Britain's 30-year yield touched fresh highs since 1998. In the UK, Prime Minister Keir Starmer's reshuffle of his top team of advisors on Monday renewed focus on fiscal challenges given the UK's high levels of borrowing and slower growth. Japan's budget request for the next fiscal year set for a record for a third consecutive year. The combined budget requests from government agencies came in at just over $830 billion. The requests were driven by record debt servicing costs and record defense spending. At the same time, the cost of supporting Japan's fast-aging society is continuing to rise. The budget may be inflated further as some items have been requested without an amount being specified. At the same time, the local media is reporting that Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's plans to ask ministers to compile an economic stimulus package to be funded by an extra budget. Toyota says it'll build its first fully electric model at its factory in the Czech Republic and will also invest in a new battery assembly facility at the plant. Japanese automaker didn't disclose details of the model or timing for production, but said that it would invest about $796 million to expand its plant in Kolin. The Czech government will invest up to $74.9 million in the dedicated battery facility. Earlier this year, Toyota said that it will launch 9 fully electric models in Europe over the next 2 years for its Toyota and premium Lexus brands. It produces the Aygo Cross and the Yaris hybrid models at its Czech plant, which has an annual capacity of some 220,000 vehicles. The Czech's auto industry makes up around 10% of its gross domestic product. Japan's Lotte Holdings and South Korea's Lotte Corporation have unveiled plans to open more than a dozen hotels in Japan by 2034. The joint venture seeks to tap the country's rapidly growing tourism industry. This marks the latest collaboration between the two confectionery giants across the South Korean and Japanese markets under the slogan One Lotte. The group announced they're looking to develop hotels in major cities and tourist centers in Japan, and that it targets to build some 4,500 rooms. The next focus of the partnership will capitalize on Japan's record-breaking inbound tourist market. Japan saw some 3.4 million inbound travelers in July, leading to a jump in hotel occupancy. Hotel prices have also risen by as much as 50% year on year. These figures are expected to rise, with the Japanese government aiming to receive 60 million foreign tourists by 2030. Lotte says it expects to use its brand power in South Korea to attract more South Korean visitors to Japan. And that's it for business. Charlie.
Thanks a lot for that, Roland. Well, we are going to go for another break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, what South Korea plans to achieve with the massive hike on its defense budget. Plus, CNA's Olivia Seong and James Cha from RSIS will be joining me in the studio for an analysis of China's Victory Day parade. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Chinese President Xi Jinping says the world faces a stark choice between peace and war as he oversees a grand military parade in Beijing. Present and prominent at the celebration, the leaders of Russia, North Korea, adding weight to China's diplomatic showcase. Kim Jong Un vows to go all out to help Moscow as Vladimir Putin thanks Pyongyang for its help in the Ukraine war. And American leader Donald Trump throws cold water on the gathering, accusing the leaders of China, Russia, and North Korea of conspiring against the U.S. China's military parade this morning was to mark 80 years since the end of World War II. Now, the ceremony was not just a commemoration of the past, but also a message about China's unstoppable rise and the alliances it has built. Well, joining us now to unpack all of this, we have James Cha, Research Fellow of the China Program at RSIS, and we're bringing Olivia back again, CNA Senior China Editor and Senior Correspondent. Well, James, let's just kick things off with you first. Firstly, appreciate you being in the studio with us. Across that whole 90-minute spectacle, right, beyond the hardware, the VIPs, and the speeches, was there anything that took you by surprise?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here, Tali, and I think most of us were quite impressed by the fact that Mr. Xi decided to give pride of place to Kim Jong Un, as well as Mr. Putin, of course, and to stand together in front as his main guests at the event. Now, if you contrast this with the World War II photographs of the Big Four policemen of World War II, meaning the US, Britain, the Soviet Union, and China. Back then, of course, it was the Republic of China. You find that the contrast is so important here because let's not forget the United Nations Security Council Permanent 5 is actually a relic of the Big Four. So, well, I'm not sure whether Mr. Xi is standing next to the right people who could be considered standing on the right side of history.
An interesting point you made there, and of course all of this victory parade all centered on one man. Olivia, President Xi unmistakably taking center stage here, but what does that staging tell us about his priorities?
And just picking up on what Prof said, right? I mean, President Xi did say that the Chinese people would always stand on the right side of history, but definitely beyond it being a diplomatic and military affair, this also says a lot about President Xi as a leader himself. You know, this is the third military parade that he's presiding over since coming to office in 2012. In fact, this Victory Day anniversary has only become such a huge thing under his leadership. The first time there was a military parade for this anniversary was back in 2015 for the 70th anniversary. And that was the first time that China held a military parade for an occasion other than National Day as well. And it was in the year before only that the National Legislature had made this particular day one that it marks the Japanese surrender and Victory Day. What surprised me also from President Xi's speech, contrasting that to 2015, was that it was relatively brief. It was just 8 minutes compared to 2015 when it was about 15, 20 minutes long. And it showed how, you know, it was short, but there was nothing really tangible in that speech compared to 2015 when he announced troop cuts of about 300,000, which was a surprise to many, but it was tangible. This time there was nothing explicit like that, but it seemed like he didn't need to say as much because there has been this modernization drive of the military and the hardware spoke for itself. But James, if I could just ask you as well, what is your read into the messaging when it comes to looking at President Xi as a leader domestically and abroad as well?
Okay, but before that, I think I just want to add on to what you've correctly pointed out about the military parades. This should be his fifth or sixth parades, if you consider also the ones done in Zhuruhe and the ones that he did out at sea, in the South China Sea. So I think one of the things that we should remember, comparing this one with what happened 10 years ago, is that Mr. Xi is firmly in charge and in control of the PLA. And if you notice, compared to 2015, his political elders, his predecessors as top party leader, Jiang Zemin, of course, he has left us, and Mr. Hu Jintao apparently is in ill health, so they were not present clearly. So he has clearly consolidated his grip on the PLA since, I would say, the end of 2015. And one of the reasons, perhaps, why his speech this time was so short could be because he doesn't have a need to anymore. Because back in 2015, he was rather new in his position as the Central Military Commission chairman. And let us not forget also the fact that the retrenchment of 300,000 troops in 2015 was actually a prelude and an important part of his ambitious military reforms that were announced 3 months after the 2015, parade.
I'm not forgetting that goal of 2049 to build a world-class military, and that's huge.
Absolutely.
And I know, Olivia, you've been sort of tracking like all sorts of reactions in and out of China, social media and all of that. What did you find?
Well, there's a lot of buzz on social media within and out of China. Within China, very quickly, the new military hardware became, at least the top 10 trending topics. But elsewhere also, you would imagine that this parade is being closely watched, including by the man himself, US President Donald Trump, who very quickly after the parade began, posted on Truth Social, in which he wrote, quote, "Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un as you conspire against the United States." That spoke volumes. And then after that, we saw, Chinese social media platform Weibo. There was a post as well in which it highlighted and picked up on Mr. Trump's post, but it did not highlight the full post. Instead, it highlighted, Mr. Trump saying his wish that President Xi and the wonderful people of China have a great and lasting day of celebration. But I do want to point out another post that came in on Weibo. That's with an account linked to Chinese state broadcaster CCTV, in which it had a post in which it said that pizza shops near the Pentagon in the US saw a surge in orders, in which it said was coincidentally when this parade in Beijing was on, which it said was an indication that the workers in the Pentagon were
eating pizzas.
Yeah, and working
watching.
overtime. Exactly. But James, how much should we read into this? This is President Trump's social media post. It's also the Chinese social media narrative. How much would it move the needle in terms of the US calculus?
I think the US calculus for the last 15 or 20 years has always been quite cautious, because knowing how much progress the Chinese military has actually attained, not just under Mr. Xi, mind you, because really he has been able to inherit a lot of the good performance economically from his predecessors, Mr. Hu and Mr. Jiang, in terms of the double-digit economic growth. And with the resources, the Chinese military has actually been able to acquire and procure quite aggressively a lot of new weapon systems, some of which we saw today.
Yep.
So, the two of them being two great nuclear powers, and apparently the People's Liberation Army would be able to achieve its goal, apparently, of having 1,000 nuclear-capable warheads by 2030. Clearly, it's not to be trifled with.
Yeah, so it's if Washington is recalibrating here, then the ripple effects probably won't stop there. So in other words, how do you read into this, right? This whole show of strength rippling across the region and beyond. And also, do you think an arms race is likely?
Well, I think let's not kid ourselves. An arms race has already begun quite some time ago due to the technological advances, and which explains why the US in the last two administrations, of the former Biden one and the current one, they've been imposing a lot of economic sanctions on Beijing's access to high-tech semiconductors and chips, which have potential to be applied in the military. So I think as much as Americans are trying to slow down the progress of the PLA, I think China is quite confident, or at least portrays itself to be, with its public statements. And even today, with the speech that Mr. Xi gave about China being unstoppable, or rather, we should point out, he was referring to the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation being unstoppable. I think it actually continues the trend of Mr. Xi being defiant in the face of the restrictions imposed by his adversary in Washington, clearly. Because if you remember, back in 2022, at the 20th Party Congress, he made some similar remarks regarding Beijing's insistence on acting independently and autonomously in its high-tech development. And, well, actually, it's quite interesting, because if you have any inkling about what one of his predecessors, Mao Zedong, wrote in his writings back during World War II, it's quite fascinating, because, in fact, Mao did actually use similar terms about how the People's Liberation Army, back then it was not called the PLA, it was still known as the 8th Route Army, under the command of Chiang Kai-shek of the Nationalist Government of China. And in fact, he actually told his great army forces to act independently of the Chinese armed forces during World War II.
But James, do you see this as a turning point in which China is trying to position itself as really an alternative leader in this global order? We've seen this narrative about how it wants to protect the post-World War II global order, the United Nations, President Xi talking about this new global governance initiative. How would you read into it? Is it ready to step into this leadership position?
I think in some respects, China is already a global leader, especially in the economic realm. So in this part of our world, for instance, there's always this conflict that in our minds about what to receive from the Americans and what to receive from China, right? So China clearly has been providing a lot of economic assistance and development to countries in need of those, whereas the Americans, traditionally since at least end of World War II, has been our security guarantor. But I think it's a statement of intent by Mr. Xi, because I believe the circumstances and the opportunities are present for Beijing to seize the opportunity in terms of the retreat of some Western governments from their traditional leadership roles globally. So leaving these vacuums, whether it is in the diplomatic realm, economic realm, even the military realm, I would say, because I believe quite strongly that the PLA is stepping up. Of course, it will still act cautiously in high-risk areas such as the Middle East. But no doubt, I think it's becoming it's becoming normalcy that we are seeing the PLA ships, for instance, traveling as far as Australia, for instance, earlier this year. And of course, the very frequent aerial activities in the Taiwan Strait. So I think it's something that we've come to become more used to and accustomed to, and we shouldn't be surprised that it has happened at all. But really, I think China is trying to fill this vacuum that is present, because it is there, and you should make use of it.
Well, some really great insights and analysis there. And I know you've been giving interviews since morning, so I really appreciate you coming in today. James Cha, a research fellow of the China program at RSIS, and also working equally hard since the morning. Thank you so very much. Our CNA senior China editor and senior correspondent, Olivia Xiong. Thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, in the meantime, South Korea's defense ministry has unveiled plans behind its biggest budget hike in 7 years. It's proposing to spend nearly $48 billion next year. That's a jump of more than 8%. Now, a large part of the budget goes into reclaiming wartime OPCON, or operational control, of its own forces from the U.S. Washington has held control of the South's military command since its involvement in the Korean War. Now, regaining wartime OPCON has been a long-standing goal for many South Koreans, including President Lee Jae-myung, who sees it as full national sovereignty and military independence. While U.S. has also been pressing Seoul to double its defense budget to 5% of its GDP. Reports say Seoul has agreed to hike spending to 3.5%, but the presidential office says negotiations with the U.S. are still underway as part of a package deal covering trade and economic terms. Some $6 billion will also be allocated to bolstering what's called the three-axis deterrence system against North Korea. And these include a missile defense system, a preemptive strike, and a retaliation system. South Korea also plans to buy SM-3 shipborne missiles that are capable of intercepting missiles at altitudes above 100 kilometers. It also wants to develop homegrown, long-range air-to-air missiles and integrate AI into its combat systems. All right, time now for another short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, we'll be bringing you analysis on China's latest military hardware, some revealed publicly for the first time at its massive Tiananmen Square parade. The leader of Thailand's Bumjai Thai party, Anutin Chanvirakul, says that he has the support of some 146 lawmakers across 7 parties to become the new prime minister. Now, this comes after the acting prime minister dissolved parliament. Well, that move followed a political shift earlier today when the largest opposition party announced its decision to support the Bumjai Thai party to form a new government. The People's Party leader said that it will also back Mr. Chanvirakul if he agrees to their terms. Now, those terms are that Parliament must be dissolved within 4 months. But before that, the Bumjai Thai government must have a referendum amending the constitution and press for the new constitution within this Parliament. Other conditions are that the Bumjai Thai must not try to become the majority party in government, and that the People's Party will remain in opposition. Mr. Anutin has vowed that he will honour these conditions.
ขอยืนยันว่าพวกเราทุกคนในที่นี้จะไม่ทำให้เจตนารมณ์และความเสียสละของทุกท่านสูญเปล่าและจะรักษาข้อตกลงทั้ง5ข้อนี้ที่ให้ไว้กับภาคประชาชนตลอดระยะเวลา4 เดือนนับตั้งแต่เราจะเข้าไปทำงานในฐานะรัฐบาล
Going back to our top story, China's military parade in Beijing, which marked 80 years since the end of World War II and Japanese occupation of parts of China. CNA's Arnold Gay spoke to a defense analyst about the military hardware on display, starting with DF-61, China's most advanced intercontinental ballistic missile.
This is certainly the cherry on the cake, Arnold, because it did not appear in satellite images during the rehearsals. It was not on social media images. It's a canisterized weapon, and based on the size of the canister, I expect it to have a longer range than the DF-41, which it replaces. Already the DF-41 is a missile that can comfortably reach the United States, but given the range and given the estimated range of this weapon, you look at the size of the canister, the launch cap, and the gas generator that's associated with the vehicle, my estimate is that this is a weapon that is able to attain a range of about 18,000 kilometers, and this puts it well within range, comfortable range of the continental United States, and puts it on par with the US ICBM systems such as the Minuteman III.
Okay, the other one that was in your top 3 as well is the JL-3.
This particular weapon has been rumored to exist for several years now. It has been appearing in a US congressional report from the Department of Defense. The reason why this weapon has generated so much interest is not because of the range. I mean, it has a range of more than 10,000 kilometers. That is significant. But because it is launched from a submarine, which is the Chinese Jin-class submarine, and that makes the deployment of the weapon very hard to predict. Calculating the interception point of a missile requires the point of origin, and the fact that it can be launched anywhere in the water makes it a very fearsome weapon.
Okay, you are also excited about the HSU-100. Apparently it's an unmanned underwater vehicle?
Yes. One thing about Chinese systems is that from the color that has been applied on the weapon, you can tell whether it's for military usage, yes, or whether it is for research purposes. It has got an X-form radar, which tells me that this is going to be deployed for observation missions, long-term observation missions in shallower waters. It's going to be going very slow and collecting data on enemy submarines, perhaps.
And Rizwan, you also set up when the AJX-002 appeared on the screens. Why?
Yeah, that's a very interesting weapon to me because from the looks of it, it is based, this particular weapon, it is based on a Russian system known as the Poseidon. And the North Koreans have also adopted the same weapon system for use as part of their nuclear arsenal. We do not know if the Chinese will similarly adopt the AJX to be used with nuclear payloads. But what the North Koreans have did is that they have incorporated a type of payload that detonates underwater and creating a mini radioactive tsunami that can overcome an adversary's coastal defenses, which is pretty concerning capability.
We also saw pictures of a number of drones, unmanned aerial vehicles. Can you tell us what that suggests in terms of what the PLA intends to do with them?
Yeah, I think I see a lot of laser weapons and unmanned systems incorporated onto platforms that previously did not feature unmanned systems. So what this tells me is that China has perhaps gathered a lot of lessons from the ongoing war in Ukraine, where we are seeing an extensive deployment of unmanned systems, commercially off-the-shelf unmanned systems that are cheaply available. I think that's concerning for China. They know that this is one of the ways in which modern warfare has evolved as we speak.
I hope you've enjoyed this Wednesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and you can always find us on Facebook and YouTube. We'll leave you now with some of the highlights of China's largest ever military parade at Tiananmen Square.